Today's session, Enterprising Change, How Social Enterprise in Ontario is Creating Jobs and Reducing Poverty, is brought to you by the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. We are a national network of several hundred community organizations and individuals working to create local economic opportunities that support an inclusive and sustainable economy. Here you can see on that slide a few of our members' logo. And here on the map, on the Canadian map, an image of our new website member map. You can find a member close to you on the map located at the web address listed at the bottom of the screen. If you like the session today, consider joining us by becoming a member, signing up for our free e-newsletter, or following us on social media. CCEDNet has done a number of incredible and great webinars like this one in recent years. Here you can see some of the topics covered, and all of these are on CCEDNet website, free for members. The list is much longer, and can you imagine there's another list for French webinars. So that's a picture of me. Etel Coté, I'm a social enterprise practitioner more than a specialist. No matter if I'm involved in the sector for the last 30 years, I'm just getting my hands in that topic of supporting and enabling social enterprise development in Ontario. And I'm very pleased to be here with you today. Today's webinar is divided in two parts. We will have presentation by Paul Chamberlain and Mosca Ulak that will last about 30 minutes. Then in the second part, I will ask them the questions you have posted in the chat box. Once again, you should feel free to post your questions, comments, and any other kind of information you're looking for in the chat box at any time. Matthew will help me collect that information, and I will be able to raise the question during the question period. Also in the chat box, if any of you have an answer to a question that's been raised, please feel free. It's a chat box for sure. It's virtually, but at the same time, it's a space for conversation. And we will finish the webinar with comments on the research reported by Katie Gibson. Before we get into the presentation, let's get to know each other a bit better with two quick polls of participants. You should see the polls pop up on the screen. The top one, we want to know who's on the webinar. Are you managing a social enterprise? Are you supporting social enterprise development? Are you part of the social finance world? Please just select. And if you have to select all of them, please do. Select all of the one that apply to you. At the same time, very briefly, I will invite you to answer the question 2. What are you hoping to learn from today's webinar? When you're answering, probably it will take a bit longer, the second question. But make it short, and we will be able to share a few of the findings from those two questions. Those of us involved in social, and let me introduce the session when you're adding your comment, and it's coming 3 answers yet, it's question 2. Those of us involved in social enterprise development are keenly aware of how our work links with poverty reduction, particularly for those enterprises that focus on hiring and training people with barrier to employment. This link between social enterprise and poverty reduction has been well recognized in Ontario, and it is significant that the province poverty reduction strategies have reference to social enterprise, social finance, and also social procurement. The Enterprising Change report that we will be talking about today includes survey data that helps to make these links more explicit. We think that having the hard data is important and exciting. So let's see who's online and what are you expecting from this webinar. And after that, we'll jump onto the presentation. 75% of the people who answer who are online are involved in social enterprise development, 35% in policy development. That's great. And you can see as me, all the other results. 50% are community organizer. And the others, 20%. So by curiosity, we'll go and look at it a bit later. But why are you here? To look at best practice, to how social enterprise leads to job creation, opportunities for cooperative entrepreneurs, So we can see there's different expectations. Thank you, Matthew, to open up this answer box. And we will cover some of those expectations, but for sure, to provide data, hard data about the scope of social enterprise, the social enterprise sector in Ontario, it will be very crisp and very sharp through the presentation, but also we will find a way to connect that data to the poverty reduction. So thank you so much. And thank you again. Many people are continuing to introduce themselves in the chat box. Most appreciated. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first presenter. Paul, I know Paul for quite a long time. We've been volunteer and professionally involved in the sector, but Paul is CCEDNet Ontario Regional Director. He also presently co-chairs with the CCO, the Co-op Francophone Movement, the Ontario Social Economy Roundtable called OSER, and manage a website, and I hope everyone will go visit that website. It's a key resource for Social Enterprise Ontario. It's called seontario.org, Ontario's foremost online resources for social enterprise. He led the CCEDNet research team conducting the provincial survey on social enterprise in 2012 and again in 2015. And it is in that capacity we will hear from him today. So Paul, I know you are going to be sharing the result of the 2015 Social Enterprise Survey, but could you begin by giving us a little background information about the survey first? Hello?
Oh, and it's just a real pleasure to be able to talk with you today about the 2015 survey for Ontario. And first, just to say that this survey was built on the 2012 survey, which was the first one in Ontario, and that resulted in the groundbreaking Inspiring Innovation report. And so we built on that survey for the current survey. In this time around, the Canadian CED Network partnered with Mars Centre for Impact Investing, but also with our senior research partners, Peter Hall and Peter Elson from Simon Fraser University and Mount Royal University, who have been leading this work across the country. The Ontario survey uses the core survey that they developed, although our survey adds a number of unique additional questions as well. So, as I mentioned, it's building on previous work, but also with the help of many networks. We identified a sample frame of 3,900 confirmed social enterprises who were all invited to participate. And I'd really remiss here if I didn't mention that some of our key partners, the Centre for Social Entrepreneurship at Georgian College, worked with us to build participation in Central Ontario. The Centre for Learning, Social Economy and Work at OISE U of T paid for graduate students to support our research. The Government of Canada, through Le Conseil de la Corporation de l'Ontario, CCO, funded 2 summer student interns. And then, of course, the Ontario Trillium Foundation and the Government of Ontario provided the core funding for the research. So it was really with the support of these funders, partners, and networks that 597 respondents completed the survey. As we look at the respondents in a little bit more detail, you can see that there were the 597 respondents actually represented more than 1,200 social enterprise entities. That's because a number of the respondents run and responded on behalf of multiple social enterprises. You can also see that the nonprofit childcare, those 40 childcare respondents were dealt with and handled differently and separately, as were the for-profits. And Muska will explain the known and unknown classification when she gets to her part of the talk. In order to be able to capture the diverse nature of social enterprises within Ontario, the social enterprises were classified into seven different subsectors. These were the farmers' markets, so that's the organizations that manage markets where farmers sell their products. employment enterprises. So these were previously referred to as social purpose enterprises. So those are the ones that are specifically developed to be able to train and or employ people with persistent barriers to employment. Then there's the arts and culture. So this would include galleries, theaters, heritage sites, museums. This is some examples, but a whole lot more. And then you can see that the thrift stores are the largest subsector. So that's all of the stores that have received donated goods for resale. Childcare and housing had not been sufficiently represented in the previous survey to be able to be classified as separate subsectors, but so we were really pleased to be able to include them as specific subsectors this time around. And then the miscellaneous that you're seeing there is basically any enterprise that doesn't fit into any of the other categories. So that could include facilities rental, translation services, cafes, non-thrift retail, and just a host of other products and services that social enterprises sell. So I should also say that the research team also distinguished francophone social enterprises within each of these respective categories.
Well, thank you, Paul. That sets the context nicely. So can you tell us more about the key results? What impacts are these social enterprises having, really?
Absolutely. So as we look at our respondents and look at the impacts collectively, their data that they reported collectively, so we're able to show that they had revenues of $490 million, of which $380 million, or 78%, was generated through sales. They employed more than 14,000 people. They trained over 57,000, and they engaged over 25,000 as volunteers. And then in addition to that, they provided services to over 4 million people, and that doesn't include their customers. So as we can see, clearly our respondents were having a major impact. But impressive as these numbers are, they only represent the information from the actual respondents. And it's reasonable to extrapolate a little from this data. Based on the constraints of academic research, in the report itself, we only extrapolate as far as the confirmed sample frame. But talking to you, I don't need to be quite so constrained. And experts estimate the fact that there are some 10,000 nonprofit social enterprises in Ontario. And so then if we use the survey results, the average numbers for each responding social enterprise, then based on that, we can, with reasonable confidence, say that in 2014, social enterprises generated some $9 billion in revenue and employed over 232,000 people. So really, I think this is, you can say that the sector is having substantial economic impact in Ontario.
It's amazing. It's really impressive. It's impressive to get a sense of the overall size of the sector, but also the level of activity. It's really moving in every community throughout the province. You have promised to provide us some of the numbers showing that social enterprise create employment and help reduce poverty. Can we go deeply in that research, and can you share with us what you've learned about that?
Absolutely, and certainly I know several people, this is what they mentioned, that this is what they wanted to learn. So in terms of the poverty focus, so for this research across the country, the social enterprises are defined as being poverty focused when they meet two specific criteria. That would be that they identify employment development as one of their purposes, or a key purpose, and then also when asked who are the people that you work with, so that you employ, you train, and you serve, if within those target groups, people with low income, homeless people, or people with employment barriers were identified, then if organizations met those criteria, then they were designated as having a poverty focus. And nearly half, or 45%, of the responding social enterprises actually could be said to have that poverty focus. It's interesting just to see how this poverty focus or poverty subset sort of fits in with some others. Social enterprises that work with people specifically with employment barriers would be a subset sort of within in poverty focus, as would those that focus and work with people with living with disabilities, although in the case of disabilities, it would maybe include the majority of them, but not all of them. The numbers in this specific slide are actually from the 2012 survey. I didn't update that, but I thought that the slide was useful enough. And in terms of how the subsectors connect with each other, that's certainly consistent with the current data as well. So looking at the poverty focus by subsector a little bit, as you can see, poverty-focused social enterprises are a part of all of the subsectors that we mentioned. We, perhaps not surprisingly, less so within arts and culture and farmers markets, and definitely the greatest within employment social enterprises, so those that specifically develop to employ and train people with barriers to employment. I should also just mention here, or it's not on the slide, that Francophone social enterprises, over 60% of the responding Francophone social enterprises had a poverty focus as well. So it's interesting to look then at poverty focus and analyze it by age. And as you can see there, clearly poverty-focused social enterprises are well established in all categories. But to me, what's really exciting here is to see that of the social enterprises, the new social enterprises, those that have developed in the last 3 years, 66% of them actually are poverty-focused. So this means that this is a growing trend, and that's certainly exciting to see. Also, I think it's really interesting to see that when you compare the revenue, both total revenue and sales revenue, with poverty-focused social enterprises with others, we can see that in terms of total revenue, poverty-focused earn on average $100,000 more. In terms of sales revenue, they earn about $150,000 more on average. And so as a percentage of revenue, that means that sales for poverty-focused social enterprises are about 10% higher than others. And also in terms of the wages and salaries that they pay out about $100,000 more in salaries and wages. So certainly we can definitely say that poverty-focused social enterprises are successful social enterprises. As we look at the revenue in a little more detail, here you can clearly see that the fact that yes, sales revenue is higher. What is perhaps a little bit more surprising is though that grant revenue for poverty-focused social enterprises is actually lower than for others. And as I said, that certainly surprised us a little bit. If we dig into that a little bit more, we can see that, in fact, when you're looking at where the grants come from, that grants from all 3 levels of government are less for poverty-focused social enterprises than they are for other enterprises, although foundations and banks, they receive more in grants from foundations and banks. And this certainly puzzled us as we looked at this. So why would it be that social enterprises that are focused on working with people with employment barriers, they have an employment development focus, why would it be that they would actually be receiving less in grants? So one possible explanation, though, is that when we're looking at revenue that's generated through actual government contracts, so if the social enterprises have a specific contract to deliver services with government, that actually gets reported and classified as earned revenue or sales. So it's possible that these poverty-focused social enterprises are in fact getting getting some of their revenue through government, but that it's actually coming as service delivery contracts. We're actually not able to say that for sure, but that's one possible explanation. I mentioned earlier that the revenue spent on salaries and wages is higher for poverty-focused social enterprises. So based on that, we would expect that they would employ more people, and certainly on average, that's true. They have 22 employees on average compared with 19 for other enterprises. For full-time equivalency, it's actually 11 compared with 7, so it's actually more of a difference. And that would seem to indicate that these enterprises, the jobs that these enterprises have are less part-time and slightly more long-term. They also, though, engage more volunteers on average. So perhaps an indication that they are more engaged with their local communities than other social enterprises. One of the additional questions that Ontario-based questions that we asked was about their strategic planning. And so specifically, they were given the statement, we plan to grow sales in the next 2 years. And they were asked whether they strongly agreed, were unsure, or strongly disagreed. And as you can see from the results here, certainly poverty-focused social enterprises responded about 10% higher, in 70% as opposed to 60% said that they strongly or they agreed or strongly agreed. We also then asked about some of these strategies for growth, and particularly around social procurement strategies. So as they were planning to grow, were they looking at potential public contracts with government or institutions? Were they looking at business-to-business contracts, business from individual employees in corporations that they knew or identified, or through individual customers? And as you can see, they higher poverty focus were higher in terms of individual customers, but dramatically higher in terms of interest in public sector contracts, and particularly business-to-business contracts. Mm-hmm. I think that what this shows in summary is that poverty-focused social enterprises are growing rapidly. They are successful enterprises, and really they're interested in fact, growing even further and even faster and employing more people. One of the things that's really quite exciting about this data is that we are able to kind of slice and dice it in a number of different ways. And so here you can actually see sort of further subsets of those that are employment focused, or also those that are specifically training focused. Their training is their main focus. And again, you can see sort of increasing levels of employment in all of those. And I've been a little longer than I planned to be, so I'm going to rush on a little bit more. You can go back and look at these in more detail yourselves. So the same trend is also true with subsets of in terms of sales revenue and total revenue for these smaller subsets of employment and training when compared with poverty, and specifically compared with all of the whole sector. So as I wrap up, I want to say first of all that really in terms of the report, I only covered about 2 sections of the report. And so there is analysis in there by subsector, by region, urban, rural, disability focused. We asked a number of questions about challenges and opportunities and report on those, as well as trends, and as well, of course, a francophone analysis. And that analysis, along with the overall summary and conclusions, is available online in French now. And then, of course, the for-profit and non-profit, which we're going to hear about from Musca. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And you cover a lot, and it's great to see the hard data. I'm sure participants, all of you, will have questions in the question Q&A at the end, but also we have a few on the chat line. We will capture that. for the question and answer period. Please continue to type your question, and we will capture everything at the end. Mosca, let's turn to our second presenter now. Mosca Oulak is Program Coordinator at MARS, Center for Impact Investing. She has been a policy and research analyst with both government and with private sector, and she has a master's degree in public policy from University of Toronto School of Public Policy and Governance. Significantly for us today, Mosca led the survey research partnership on behalf of Mars Center for Impact Investing. This 2015 Ontario survey was unique in Canada in that it is the first research of its kind to include analysis of both for-profit as well as non-profit social enterprise. Mosca will share some of the findings of the for-profit data and how the two sectors compare. Thank you so much, Mosca, and we're pleased to welcome you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Etel. First, I would like to thank CCEDNet for including us as a project partner for this very important research project. For those of you who are not familiar with our work, through our venture services stream at the Mars Center for Impact Investing, we are continuously seeking opportunities to grow the social enterprise sector. We help connect impact entrepreneurs to potential investors and support them to grow and launch their initiatives. In order for us to better understand the sector, we do need hard facts and numbers. So including the for-profit sector for the first time in this report was a huge milestone. And also through this collaborative research project, we hope to build a detailed sector profile and understand the sector's major barriers and growth strategies. So just before I jump into the major findings for the for-profit sector, I would like to briefly discuss the definition of for-profit social enterprises for clarity purposes. I think it's important to note that there's a wide range of definitions and criteria for what constitutes a social enterprise. I think for the purpose of this research project, we use the most popular definition, which is a for-profit social enterprise is a business venture incorporated as a for-profit business with a defined cultural, social, and/or environmental mission. I think the word incorporation is key here. So when you're looking at the Canadian context and Ontario context, so that's social purpose businesses that are incorporated under the Ontario Business Corporation Act or the Canadian Business Corporation Act. So in terms of the sample and response rate. Since there's a lack of an existing baseline data on social enterprises in Ontario, and in order for us to create an accurate list, for the sample frame, what we did was we gathered Mars social venture client data using our internal client management tools. And then these included social enterprises from different practice areas, including healthcare, clean technology, education technology, and other social innovation clients. So this sample frame included all the ones that we had identified, and we refer to this as a known sample frame, which Paul spoke a little bit at the beginning. We also reached out to the broader community through an anonymous survey. The survey was the exact same thing, but it was just that we had not identified that data set. It was just sort of open to individuals to fill out or organizations who had identified themselves as a for-profit social enterprise. However, to be consistent with the non-for-profit technology, and for this report, we only included the responses of those enterprises that were known, or the ones that we had identified at the beginning of the project. So this project includes 75 out of 108 confirmed for-profit social enterprises. So in terms of the key findings, one of the major findings sort of relates to the diversity of the sector. What we found interesting was that the sector is active in diverse fields ranging from trade, finance, to health and social services. More than half, about 52% of the respondents identified as falling under multiple different sectors. So this diversity, as well as the multi-sector focus, really shows the vibrant nature of the enterprise and their mission to tackle multiple different issue areas. So I put together sample mission statements that were provided by the respondents, so you can get a sense of the vibrant nature of this the sector. So as you can see, there's an enterprise that is focusing on accessibility. There's one that focuses on affordability gap, addressing affordability gap. There's youth-focused social enterprises. There's one that is focused on environment, specifically recycled products, and driving the whole recycling movement. So these are just an example, just to show you the diversity. The other important key findings relate to the revenue and growth. So similar to the non-for-profit sector, the for-profit social enterprises are important instruments in contributing to economic prosperity and job creation. And also keeping within the context of this webinar, the other way we could look at how the sector contributes to the overall economic growth is by looking at the revenues, financial details, and growth strategies. I won't discuss the findings relating to poverty and job creation in detail, since Paul covered that in depth at the beginning. So in terms of the revenue, we asked respondents to indicate their revenue from different sources. On average, almost all of the total revenue for the for-profit sector is derived from sales of goods and services. We also found that the for-profit social enterprises earned about 1.2 times more in total revenue on average compared to the non-for-profit social enterprises. And the total average revenue for the sector is about $1.18 million. And sort of quickly comparing that to the 2009 numbers that were reported through the social finance census, we can see that there has been some growth, as majority of them had indicated their revenue to be less than 500K. And also with the current research project we did with CCEDNet, we're able to accurately estimate the range, the revenue and the sources of these revenue. So that was a huge finding. Also, the two sectors vary in their strategies for growth. For the for-profit sector, is more likely to grow through increased sales. So this kind of highlights the fact that the sector has strategic plans to grow and then scale their impact. Right. Also, when it comes to raising revenue from alternative sources, the for-profit sector is more likely to raise revenue from repayable equity, loans and mortgages compared to the non-for-profit sector. The differences in the response rate could be attributed to the different legal structures of the two sectors. Also, these findings helped us determine these businesses' experience with financial instruments, their need for capital, including sources of capital used to start and grow their businesses. In addition to the sales revenue, for-profit social enterprises also rely on traditional sources of funding for different purposes. So the sources of grants, so over a quarter of the for-profit social enterprises received grants from provincial government and federal government. So this is very similar to non-for-profit social enterprise. The purpose was for research and development, technical assistance, and operation. In terms of loans, we find that the for-profit social enterprises are much more likely than the non-for-profit sector to use debt financing. And the top three sources of loans for the for-profit sector were private individuals, banks, and corporations. And the purpose of these loans are the exact same thing as the ones for the purpose of grants. So it's research development, technical assistance, and operations. So those are the major sort of findings that are very unique to this sector.
Thank you so much, Muska. It's very interesting to see some of the comparison between the for-profit and the non-profit social enterprise. And also, it's amazing to see the dramatic difference in expectation to be using loan financing. You mentioned that you were going to tell us about a little change, about the challenge and the resources needed to identify by for-profit enterprise, but challenge and resource needs for-profit social enterprise. Please guide us.
Sure, absolutely. Just a little bit of context for you. An important goal of this research project was for us to assess the engagement activity and then growth plans of the sector, so including barriers that they face, these enterprises face in growing. So we asked respondents to extrapolate further on challenges in growing and scaling their enterprises. I think this sort of relates to the fact that there has been various provincial and regional initiatives to continue to support the development and growth of these organizations. It was important for us to hear from these social enterprises themselves as which resources they find most useful to achieve their mission and grow their enterprises. So the top three challenges for the sector were cash flow, access to grant capital, and access to loan capital. This is probably not surprising for most, as access to capital is an ongoing challenge. And this could also be attributed to the nature of the sector and its difficulty to tap into existing funding sources, since they don't usually fit into the traditional funding mold. As for the challenges, there was also very strong differences in the most helpful resources. The for-profit social enterprises are much more likely to have an interest in resources on capital, social purpose investment opportunities compared to the non-profit social enterprises. So overall, what we've seen there is that there's been a lot of growth in this area. However, the sector continues to face key barriers and challenges. There's still work that needs to be done to unlock some of the different capital sources for the enterprise to amplify their impact. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Muska. And well, we have a few questions online, and also we can take one or two. And if you want to say it verbally, you can use also your phone, but you'll have to raise your hand with the little icon at the top of the screen. Matthew raised a question regarding, and I think it will be for Paul, raised a question regarding social enterprise who probably deliberately to reduce their dependence on grants. Organization will engage in social enterprise to become probably less dependent to grants. Is it the case? And is it really the case for social enterprise involved in poverty reduction? And also Mark responded to with few comments regarding that question. But Paul, would you comment or answer that question? Are you seeing more social enterprise who are really getting deliberately engaged to start up a social enterprise or to transform as a social enterprise to reduce their dependence on grants?
So certainly, I think this discussion, and if others do follow the discussion a little bit in the chat box there that Matthew and Mark have had and a couple of others. So I think this was responding to my comment about the fact that poverty-focused social enterprises had less grant money from government. And so yes, as Matthew was saying, well, maybe this is because they're actually trying to reduce their dependence on grants, and I think that is a really possible explanation as well. Unfortunately, in terms of from the data, that we're really probably sort of guessing about it or using educated guesses, because there's nothing in the way that the data is reported that can tell us that for sure. But certainly we do know that within the nonprofit sector generally, there are a good number of social enterprises that are formed specifically by nonprofit organizations to be able to earn revenue for their parent organizations. And we are able to do a little bit of a cross-analysis, say, between those that specifically have as one of their purposes to create revenue for a parent organization, and those that are poverty focused. And so certainly, although the majority of those that are poverty focused, their main reasons for being, they tend to be more often the reason is for employment and training, but certainly there are a good percentage that are doing this to be able to raise revenue for a parent organization as well. And yeah, I don't have those figures right off the top of my head, but I do remember them. They're definitely part of that subsector.
Yes, and in the practice, many of us would say the same thing. In Ottawa right now, we are documenting that movement also through seeing a lot of nonprofit organizations being interested to look at the social enterprise, the one engaged with in social issues or poverty issues, but also all the other ones, because they want to generate enough revenue to reinvest in their mission, and they see the funding trends out there who can, that trends of funding to support their mission and their organization. It's really become more and more challenging. So people are looking at their mission. They know there's a purpose for their organization in their community. They're also providing services in the key services in the community. So we are facing and acknowledging the same thing you were saying. It's been documented in some other survey, and that information, Paul, will be online as well. I would imagine part of the some of the research done by CCEDNet.
Absolutely, yes.
Perfect. And I know I don't see any other question. And yes, if you want to go through the different slides, Matthew will unsync the slides so you can go and pick up the slides you want to look more deeply and probably study them. But we'll go. Yes, Paul?
I'm seeing one question there from Megan just asking about whether the list of social enterprises surveyed by region has been made available. In terms of the actual respondents, because of confidentiality issues, that we're not able to actually provide lists of who was in our sample frame. However, through seontario.org that Etel mentioned earlier, the website, there is a directory there, and it is geographically based. So it's not 100%, but you can certainly get a good view of social enterprises within that directory. And if you know of social enterprises that aren't on that directory, then there's a form on the website that you can use to actually send us the information so that we can add them. Maybe one other question. I did notice.
From Barb.
I did notice among our participants, we had somebody with the co-op sector, and although I didn't really mention co-ops, I do just want to say that we did do a little bit of an analysis of co-ops as part of the poverty-focused social enterprises, and about a third of responding co-ops were said to have a poverty focus. So clearly, co-ops are definitely a part of providing significant contribution in terms of poverty, the poverty focus. And similarly, I noticed there's somebody specifically interested in disability-related social enterprises, and certainly about 20% of the poverty-focused social enterprises said that they specifically work with people with disabilities. We broke it down between, that people had a choice of selecting whether they worked with people with physical disabilities, psychological disabilities, or intellectual disabilities. And certainly all three of those groups, people worked with all three of those groups, slightly more in physical disabilities than the other categories, but certainly again. And disability-related social enterprises, as you can see in the analysis in the report, are also, by and large, more successful than others on average.
If we want to reach out some social enterprise in a specific region in Ontario, could we go through CCEDNet without having access to the list? Could you send our message to some of your mailing lists?
Absolutely, and as I say, in addition, the directory is there, but certainly we can do that. And also increasingly, there are regional social enterprise networks developing. So CNOs in the north, Social Enterprise Network of Ontario. There's of Northern Ontario, there's a new enterprise network beginning in the Simcoe and adjoining counties through Georgian College. There's interest in Niagara region, and I know Ottawa have a network of social enterprises. So again, there are local social enterprises developing in various regions, and happy to share information about those.
And Paul, you have another last question, and after that I will wrap up to make sure we can hear from Katie's comments, hearing both surveys and results and findings. Barb wrote a question, giving the extrapolated revenue for the whole sector, do you see an overall growth from your 2012 survey? And is the social enterprise sector growing from a revenue perspective?
Well, so certainly in absolutely in terms of our the data we collected, the revenues and the average revenues of respondents are higher this time than they were previously. When we looked at trends, we also had to sort of take out, if you will, some of the subsectors that we hadn't surveyed previously, like the childcare sector, because certainly revenues there tend to be higher, and housing and so on. But even when we did a direct comparison, there is the revenues generally for social enterprises do seem to be growing. And as I said earlier, in the fact that the numbers of social enterprises are growing, and as we look at the numbers, both poverty-focused and more generally, that are developing recently, there's definitely a trend for developing more social enterprises, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Barb continued. Thank you so much, Paul. And Barb had it then. We've heard a recent financial challenge from an organization like Goodwill Toronto. Are they an outliner in terms of coming up against those financial issues? And are their challenge indicative of what's happening for other social enterprises in Ontario?
Well, so the Goodwill situation is certainly, I mean, I think Goodwill is just one area of Ontario, and certainly, I think as we look at the thrift shop sector generally, frankly, they are thriving in Ontario. So Goodwill's specific problem does not seem to be reflected from what we're seeing, certainly in with thrift shops generally. So yeah, it's I mean, certainly there are challenges in terms of increased competition within the sector and so on. But I think certainly I can say that from when our view of the thrift shop sector generally, I think it is a healthy sector, and the Goodwill Toronto situation seems to be definitely a bit of an outlier.
Thank you so much. And I will wrap up the question period, but continue to write them down, and also we can do follow-up with Paul and Mosca after this webinar. But thank you so much, Mosca. We didn't have any questions for you, but I think it's quite like it's a premiere to hear that kind of information from the for-profit and the non-profit social enterprise. And you really succeed to present the comparison and unveil that data, that information, and to understand more what is similar and what is different. And also specifically regarding financing, the attitude regarding and the expectation to be using loan financing. And I was partly interested by the challenge and resource needs, and I'm looking forward to read the whole report. So I'm not sure, Mosca, that report will be available where?
It will be available on our website soon. There are a few things that we are trying to finalize, but it should be available soon on our website. It's impactinvesting.rcd.com. So hopefully very soon. But thank you so much for having me and for organizing this webinar and for us to share this information.
And we should also say that quite a lot of that comparative information is already in the existing report as well. It's not quite the level of depth that we're expecting in the report from Muska, but there is quite a bit of comparative information there already.
And both of you covered a lot of content in your two presentation, and in the time we had allocated, it was 30 minutes, but you really covered a lot of ground. But we have another person who will join the conversation. And thank you, everyone, for your question. And don't hesitate to continue to type it if you do have any question. And Matthew is adding website and connection and resources to answer some of your questions, or if you're looking for information, he's connecting the dots. So thank you so much. And I will invite Katie Gibson now to join us, because Katie is the Director of Social Enterprise Branch at MEDI, and maybe many on the line met her in the different consultation in the communities or elsewhere, but Katie is one of the leaders in our spectrum right now. Previously, she led the Community Finance Solution at Mars, NC2, and prior to that, worked on building impact and advocacy with international NGO. She's also a lawyer and MBA graduate of McGill University. And we know that Social Enterprise Branch made extensive use of the 2012 Inspiring Innovation Report, and they contribute funding for this round of research. So thank you so much, Katie, for the whole movement. Under Katie's leadership, the branch has been conducting an extensive consultation, the one I was mentioning a few minutes ago. That's the extensive consultation process in preparation for a new social enterprise strategy. We call that Social Enterprise Strategy 2.0, and we are thrilled that she has agreed to take a few minutes to comment on the survey findings. So over to you, Katie.
Great, thanks so much, Etel. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So thanks so much, Paul, and to the CCEDNet team for their hard work in pulling together this research report and for putting on today's webinar. And Muska, thank you as well for your comments, and to everybody who's listening for participating today. So I wanted to take just a brief moment to outline the Social Enterprises Branch's role within the Ontario government, for those who aren't familiar with it, and then to speak to how we leverage this report in our work. So the Social Enterprise Branch is part of the Ministry of Economic Development, Employment and Infrastructure within the Ontario government. It was launched in 2012. In 2013, we came out with our first strategy with a broad mandate to support the growth and development of the social enterprise sector in Ontario. So since that first strategy, we've launched a number of exciting programs. I'll just mention two briefly here. So one is the Social Enterprise Demonstration Fund, which is a $4 million fund that's providing capital to social enterprises across Ontario. And the way that's working is that it's being distributed by 11 regional intermediaries across the province, including the Centre for Social Innovation in Toronto, Wabatech on Manitoulin Island, Paro up north, and Pillar Nonprofits in London, Ontario. More recently, we've launched the Ontario Community Loans Fund pilot, and this is a program that will be working with mainstream financial institutions, and it'll allow businesses to receive a reduced interest rate on a loan in the form of a rebate, and they get that reduced interest rate on their loan for each person with a barrier to employment that they hire and retain for 6 months. So the idea there is that this will help up to 500 people build their careers and support 1,100 businesses. So both of these programs are on the Ontario government website, and you can find out more about them there. As Etel mentioned, this winter we've been working hard to develop a new social enterprise strategy. And in doing that, we've taken a multi-pronged approach. First part was doing consultations. So as Etel mentioned, we hosted 5 regional consultations and spoke with just under 400 people across the province, including social entrepreneurs, staff from regional innovation centers, academics, funders, a whole range of folks. In addition to those regional consultations, we also hosted 5 subject-specific consultations, really doing a deeper dive into particular subjects like capital for social enterprises, or like procurement, government procurement, and how that could support social enterprise. So in addition to those consultations, we also did, our second prong was interjurisdictional consultations, talking to our colleagues in the UK and the US, in British Columbia, Quebec, Nova Scotia, other leading jurisdictions, really to make sure that we're on top of, sort of leading policy trends in social enterprise development. And then the third prong was research, and this is what really relates to what we're talking about today. We did look at the research out there and the best practices out there from a variety of sources, one of which was the CCEDNet survey that we're talking about today. So with that, I'll transition to discussing just a few broad thoughts from our perspective on the survey. The first is, the economic and jobs data were enormously useful for us. Really providing us with, economic job-related data for the social enterprise sector, things like how many jobs social enterprises create, the revenues they generate, and so on. And the reason why this is important to us as the social enterprise branch is, as we seek to turn our strategy that we're developing into policy, we need to go through a number of layers of approvals within government, a lot of sort of revisions and people weighing in on that. And having numbers like these really help make the case for investing in social enterprise. We have to make this case both to people who understand the social side of things, which, is a case that I think is easier to make, but also we need to make the economic argument. And having these kind of big round numbers really helps us make that economic argument. So that was one thing that was very useful, is just the economic and jobs data. The second is really helping us understand the complexity of the sector. So it was really useful for our team to have, our hypotheses confirmed by the report regarding the diversity of perspectives, the diversity of needs in the sector. And I think, this was really highlighted today, but just seeing the research that shows that not-for-profit and for-profit social enterprises need different kinds of supports delivered in slightly different ways. Also really, we saw this in our regional consultations, but really understanding how, a social enterprise in the GTHA might be needing some different supports from a social enterprise in Northern Ontario. So that's another piece that was useful for us. And then the third one that I would just mention is the identification of broad trends. So it really was useful for us to see that the report highlighted some of the trends that, I think were also confirmed in our consultations. So a couple of things like capital. We heard and we see in the research that capital is a major concern for many social enterprises. The need for grant capital at the early and mid-stage, loans, and sort of debt and equity at later stages. I think that's useful for us to see in the research. And then also it was helpful for us to read more about capacity building supports. So thinking about business planning support, sales and marketing, operations, human resources, sort of the basic business supports, but also understanding the need for tailored social entrepreneurship supports like impact measurement. So I just wanted to touch on those three things that we thought were particularly useful to us. But what I'd reiterate is, I think what we've been hearing today is that this is all just the beginning. We know many social enterprises have been in operation for decades, but the sector is still young. So we're really looking forward to seeing more research to help us all better understand the sector, understand what's working well, what's holding the sector back, what impact it's having, and how all of us, including government, can help support its continued growth. So I'll leave it there. But again, thank you to Etel and Paul and the CCEDNet team for inviting me to speak.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of everyone, thank you, Paul, Muska, and Katie, for your great presentation, and Katie for having some comments and sharing additional information. We are, it's 1 o'clock. Just give me 30 seconds to give you some update. You can see that slide of resources. It's really different resources we referred during the presentation. And if you want more information about the organization of our presenters, it's also available in the slide deck. You will be able to access very shortly on CCEDNet website. We really invite you to visit the website, SE Ontario. That's another way, Katie, your branch supported the movement building, is to to support us to create a platform of information in French and English for all the different aspects of social enterprise development. It's a great tool also to promote, but to connect. And also, there is also a major conference in Montreal, May 18th to 20th. Please join us. It's ECONOS in English, ECONOU in French. It's a major conference across the border, across the border within Canada, Canadian National CED Conference of the year, and social enterprise will be very embedded in this agenda. Please do come, and don't hesitate. You can continue to receive the free e-newsletter, but you can also become, like me, a member of CEDNet and being able to participate to major events here and there. Thank you. You can see the email and also the connection of their own website to Katie Gibson from the Social Enterprise Branch, to Paul Chamberlain from CEDNet Ontario office, and Muska Ulak from the Impact Investing from Mars for your contribution. And that webinar is recorded, like I